Hi, everyone. Welcome to 30 Minutes of Wisdom. I'm Lynn Min. I'm your host today, and I'm with two fabulous people, Lincoln and Veronica. We're going to talk about the power of vulnerability. Such a good one. So I wanted to start off with a story or a little fun fact. Actually, when you look up vulnerability and translate it into the Korean language, which I happen to be Korean, you get all these sorts of really interesting definitions, like the ability to be hurt or like weakness that's exposed. And it's such a negative thing that it's been really hard and interesting to try to have a conversation with vulnerability with my parents or with generations or with people from different cultures where this isn't even a word. And so I realized it might be hard for the corporate situation too, to come in with your vulnerable self. And maybe it's not the thing of the world today to be vulnerable, but I wanted to reframe that. And maybe, what do you guys have to say on that? Like bust a myth on vulnerability and kind of reframe it as a strength.
Yes, absolutely. I feel that more than ever, there is a place for vulnerability, particularly with everything that is happening in the world. We have a lot of unprocessed trauma. And with that, I guess there is a vulnerable place where with ourselves, because we have a lot of things that we haven't processed, and there is isolation, lack of connection to others. So this year, as difficult as it has been, as challenging as it has been, is also a year where we are practicing some of the most powerful lessons for our life.
Yeah. Lincoln, can you help us with this reframing also? I love the way you talk about vulnerability as strength.
Absolutely. It's interesting because this week, as I was preparing to speak on the subject, I kept feeling this sort of inner resistance to the word vulnerable, right? And then you mentioned the definition also, but I looked it up to sort of try to reconcile with why I was feeling this inner resistance. And then it became clear to me, right? Vulnerable, the definition that I found was susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm.
Yes.
And some of the synonyms are at risk, endangered, and unsafe, to name a few. And then I started to think to myself, well, what are some of the things that we most commonly associate with being vulnerable? Those are things such as validating and taking personal accountability for our feelings, going after the things that we want in life, and accepting that the process is not always going to be perfect and without its share of adversity. Also, things such as not trying to be a people pleaser and actually setting personal and professional goals for personal and professional boundaries, I should say, for ourselves. And then, so as I was thinking about these examples, what I did was I asked myself, does taking bold and decisive action towards any of these things make me feel as though I am susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm?
Absolutely.
100%. No, I'm joking.
And I do want to say something about that. Lincoln, because I did look up the meaning, right? And it has a Latin root, right? Vulnus, wound.
Yes.
The verb vulnerare, to wound. And I said, wow, that doesn't sound very good. And then I thought about it. I sat with it and I said, when we are vulnerable, we do make ourselves capable of being wounded, but also we're opening ourselves to the greatest love story. To the greatest love story. Because, and why did I say that? Because the most meaningful experience I have had in life is when I went to that place where I could let myself be open, allow myself to trust. And it created a deeper connection with myself and also with others. And the love, you grow in love more with yourself and grow in love in deeper connection with others.
Definitely. If I can just piggyback off of that, because I agree, what eventually the resolution that I came to, or the the understanding that I came to within myself was that the way I felt when I did those things was I was showing me that I care about me. You know, I felt like I was not allowing myself to be a prisoner of my fears, and that I was strengthening my trust within my relationship with myself, right? By acknowledging this inner conflict that I had, and then taking the necessary steps to prove to me, like I said, that I love me. You know, so where circumstances can, I think it's important to acknowledge that where circumstances can start to veer off into that territory of being susceptible to physical and emotional harm is when our relationship with ourselves is not built on trust, right? Because we're not acknowledging that inner conflict and then taking that bold, decisive action to prove to ourselves that we care about ourselves.
What you guys are both saying is so interesting because it kind of pinpoints the human condition. Like, we're trying to market vulnerability as power, but really what it is we're asking people to walk towards their woundedness, right? Walk towards the place where you're feeling the suffering and the ouch, right? And the pain. And it's hard because primitively, right, we are wired, right, to stay away from things that hurt us. Right. So vulnerability is not like primitively, it's something that we reject. And of course, we build walls and we want to keep ourselves safe. Right. Like we're asking people to, can you come into this place where you're susceptible to harm, emotional harm, even judgment, things that hurt you, or, where you're taking a risk and feel unsafe. And so every inkling of us, primitive inklings at least, will say no. And I think this is why, for me, there's a power of vulnerability, because you cannot move into vulnerability from a very primitive place. You have to be resonating at a higher vibration. The Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You can't be like in a hungry place or like a place where you're looking for safety. You have to have checked up all the boxes, and only the actualization, or maybe even the self-transcendent self, can choose to walk towards, consciously choose to walk towards something that feels unsafe. And yet, see that choice, I think that's the power. And so, Lincoln, you said something really, really profound about this trust. And maybe, Veronica, you also had mentioned things about, you opened it up with how people are going through unprocessed trauma, right? As a therapist, I know it's not cool to lead people into things that they're not ready for. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, it would be brutal for me to tell, anybody to walk into like war veterans, right? If they're in the middle of a war, I'm not going to have a vulnerability talk with them, because they're going to go back out there the next day and they're going to fight, they're going to kill, they're going to see all crazy stuff, right? And so that is not a good time, right, to open them up. And I think that's what we're talking about in this time where we feel there's like a reality to that, right? There's like a lot of like COVID situations and money has to be made. And there's a lot of urgency as to why we shouldn't let our guards down. Mm-hmm. A topic like this is so, contra, to our primitive inklings, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah. Veronica, yeah. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Veronica. Yes, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was reflecting on what you were saying, Lynn, because the person has to go through their own process first and come to a place of psychological safety.
Yes.
Where they can feel they can trust you with their heart, with their wounds, and feel hopeful that they're going to see the light at the end of it.
Right.
So they're trusting you that you will guide into a place of healing and light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the end of the day, people won't open up until they won't have the courage. And that courage is really about the hope. Is the universe benevolent? If I open up, am I going to get stabbed, or is it going to be okay? And if they start to have little inklings of, it might be okay to let my guards down, then we can start to have okay, now what does vulnerability look like in terms of picking up your power? Yeah. Definitely. I would love to talk about what are some ways that we can be vulnerable, practical or in the corporate culture? Lincoln?
I think a key focus of ours has to be to approach vulnerability from a place of mindfulness. I think mindfulness plays a huge key in this from the standpoint that everyone that we express our true authentic self with doesn't have the people skills to help us feel supported.
Mm.
We need to understand that being supportive of people and enabling them to feel as though they are heard is something that a lot of people don't come into this, that we all don't come into the world pre-programmed with. It's a skill that we have to actually learn. We have to develop it. And what I've just come to accept is that for a lot of people, it's not very high on their list of priorities to develop that skill. You know, so then us as people who ultimately will have to find this space to let that energy out, let that vulnerable energy out, we have to come to the understanding that we have to make up in our own minds to not allow someone else's inability to be supportive of us get in the way or discourage us from being supportive of ourselves. This then enables us to have a healthy relationship with our growth and development into the greater expression of our true authentic self, right? Because the bottom line is that at the end of the day, it's us versus us. Our external environment serves primarily to give us feedback on how open and loving we are with ourselves. So if there's any lack in any of those areas, then we can rest assured that our environment is going to inform us of this.
There's something that I learned with this, Lincoln and Lynn, is that we have to treat our lives as sacred, right? So who will you entrust something very sacred in your life with? Who will you entrust this your emotions with? And there are two things that are important to practice: is wisdom and discernment. Wisdom and discernment are key, because even in the corporate world, as you both know, you're good friends of mine. I spent most of my career in the financial service industry, and mostly surrounded by men in the corporate world. And at times, I was the only woman, and I had to navigate that, because there are aspects of my life that I knew I could open up to, and there are aspects of my life that I knew that they were sacred and not appropriate for the setting. So is having that balance, when do we practice vulnerability? When do we maintain a proper boundary, right? But I do have to say that, even speaking about the company where I spent most of my professional career at Bloomberg, I was going through a very difficult personal experience. I mean, I had spent most of my life in a particular faith, and after 7 years or so, I decided to walk away, and I felt very, very alone, because when you leave a community that you belong to all of your life, then there is really no community, and you are so alone. And all I had was work. And I had no friends, because those friends decided to leave me because I was no longer part of their faith. But I remember sitting at, this long, and in this desk where we had, so many, we shared the space with so many people. And one of my colleagues, Shilpa, decided to invite me for lunch. And I remember my heart was pounding. Okay, so now I'm going to go to lunch with a colleague, but what am I going to talk about? And I have to say that lunch and the open and simple and beautiful conversation we had created the most amazing friendship. We have been best friends for over 17 years now, because I was able to share with her my struggles at that moment and my connection to the higher power and what was valuable to me. And that was a moment that everything turned around, and I started rebuilding my life, my identity, and creating the community, the support system that I needed.
I love that. I take from Lincoln when you said mindfulness, and I take from Veronica when you named it, what that really means is discernment and wisdom. And it reminds me of the dangers of vulnerability is like, we're not asking people, nothing's powerful about just, like being naked everywhere. There are appropriate boundaries, like with my children. Like I would never share, not just yet, not with my 9, 7, and 6-year-old just yet, like details of how I feel about my partner, or, like that's just not appropriate. But I'm not being fake. I'm not withholding necessarily for the sake of withholding. I think there's a judgment there that, hey, there's a discernment there that like, maybe this is not yet ready. Maybe when they're like in their 20s, or maybe even in their teens, this is something I would love to open up. But that was such a good reminder. And so what other ways do we practice vulnerability? I think one really practical way for me is telling stories, right? I remember when I was a minister at the church that I served with Veronica we had a small group called Storicity. It was a city full of stories. And my job as a facilitator was have people tell their stories, because it's a spiritual practice. And if you think about it, it's so deep and profound. I mean, our ancestors, right, told and taught us who we are by telling stories. And so, where do we get to tell the stories of our lives and hear other people's stories? It's such a unifying thing. What do you guys think? You guys have any stories to share, actually?
Well, as a matter of fact, Lynn, that's where we bonded a lot as friends.
Yeah, that's true.
You created a small group where people, I think it was a group of 7 people or so, yeah. And we would share every week. You started with some very creative questions, but we got to share more of ourselves. And I became so much closer to you. I bonded with you as a friend, and then we were friends ever since. But I remember that was a foundation for something that happened later. I lost my grandma. And the reason why that was a very difficult experience in my life, or an extremely difficult loss, it was because my grandma raised me after my mom died when I was little. I lost my mom when I was 9. And my grandma took care of me. But I never got a chance to grieve my own mom when I was a little girl. I didn't fully understand what was happening. I couldn't fully process. So losing my grandma, that happened, 3-4 years ago, was the hardest experience of my life. And the reason why I can share this in this group, because we are practicing of being vulnerable. My grandma took days to die. Days, or I can't remember, a week or over a little bit over a week. But her children, including my father, my uncles, and my aunt, they were so broken, and someone had to help her die. And I felt like I had to be strong for grandma, I had to be strong for everybody else, and I helped administer, this painkiller, and that eventually was going to also help her die. And it came to the point that I was just on this mindset that I was going to be there until the last moment for her. And then she died. And she lived in North Carolina, and I went back immediately the next day to New York City or New Jersey. And I remember being so broken, but I didn't want the rest of my family to see how much I was suffering, because I wanted to be strong for them as well, because I knew they were grieving. My grandma was everything for us, everything. And I remember it got to the point that I disconnected myself from friends, because I felt that they wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand my pain. They wouldn't understand my sorrow, my loneliness. And it went on for months and months. And I was suffering alone. And, some people some of my friends tried to understand, but I could understand by their comments, and they didn't understand. And it got to the point that I was driving through the Lincoln Tunnel to come back to my home in New Jersey. And the suffering was so deep that I remember starting to scream my grandma's name as I was driving back home through the Lincoln Tunnel, grandma, grandma, And at that moment, I said, I need to talk to somebody. I need to talk to somebody. And that's when it took me just 5 minutes from the Lincoln Tunnel to my parking lot. I turned off the car and I call you, Lynn. I call you because you were the person that allowed me, even from the past, right? And during the historicity times, to be open and vulnerable. But I remember calling you desperately for hope, for anything that will make it better. And you said just the right things. You said just a few words, and I was able, like, all this pain left me at that moment. And I will always thank you for that, always. And I'm grateful that I had the courage to be vulnerable when I felt that I was dealing with all of it alone. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vero, for sharing that, for being this naked and raw, And, it's the ironic thing is I didn't know you were at that moment. I didn't know you were that in pain. And it reminds me that we have to practice the muscle of vulnerability for such a time as that, right? That those many moments in historicity where you were telling your story led you to be able to tell your story when it mattered, when it had to be told. And the other ironic thing is, I'm so humbled because I don't know what I said then. I don't know, but I'm so grateful that I said it, or like that the source was able to share that space with you. That something magical happens in vulnerability, and it's not from here because I don't remember, and I don't even know how to concoct of what to say.
It came from the heart.
Yeah, it came from a space of all guards down. It wasn't concocted or intellectualized, and I think that's where the power comes in, right? I think we developed this connection.
And a bond and a friendship that I knew that nothing could break that bond ever.
Yeah. So how do we also teach other people or model for other people how to pick up that power? Because it is power. It's not something that you learn like up here, but it's a way of being. Yeah. And it matters when it matters is what I'm also taking away. Whew.
I agree. I think the most important thing is for us to want it. It's such a huge power. We're talking about, look at the effect that your ability to be that person had on Veronica. And it's very important to note that not everyone wants that power. Not everyone wants that responsibility. Spider-Man told us with great power comes great responsibility. And it's so important to acknowledge that not everyone is up for the challenge of having that responsibility. You have developed that skill, Lynn. You've developed those tools to enable you to be there for a person when they're vulnerable and to not make them self-aware of themselves, right? In that moment, in a way where they feel uncomfortable. A lot of people don't have that ability.
But I actually would say, Lincoln, that perhaps most people probably do. We just haven't stepped into it.
Right. Yeah.
We haven't, as I call it, because it's radical freedom. We haven't stepped into a place of radical freedom because
or
with
maybe we haven't.
Courage,
yeah. I'm sorry.
With radical courage is the courage. With radical courage comes radical freedom. How are we ever going to be good at listening intently with our heart until we're fully connected unless we do it?
Yeah.
Unless we dare to step into that space.
Step in, and also there's stuff that we got to step out of.
Yes.
Right? Like that big bulky defense mechanism is the same thing. It's like, it's great. It defends you, but it comes like it's a thing that comes between you when you're in a relationship now, in an intimate relationship. Maybe it's coming up in your sex life. Maybe it's coming up with, your family dynamics. But whatever it is, it's that same wall that we build that we need to have the courage to step out of.
And you know what? It's so powerful what you just said, because as I'm getting older and older, there's just one thing in my mind. It's so tiring to wear masks. I'm done with wearing masks.
Woo!
And even the way I show up with my friends, I've always been known as being someone very truthful. And at the same time, we have to be mindful and truthful. But I want to be that person. And where I am in my personal life, an extension to that in my professional life. And the masks is tiring. It takes so much energy. Why? We spend so much time at work. Can we make a little effort to connect at the human level as well? And obviously with our friends is something that we should always be doing, especially now. So many people are feeling lonely. We're stuck in these places. I mean, I'm blessed. I have my family close. I see them now. But if I would have stayed in New York, I'm single. Most people are with their families. It's difficult. And I know I have plenty of single friends that barely are seeing people.
That's right.
It's not normal, right? It's not normal. And I know that the people who are married and have their families are facing other things, and we need one another more than ever.
Thank you for that. Yeah, persona is actually the root word comes from mask. Personality, ego, the part of us that we feel we should be, because I feel somehow that this is the part of me that I should be, right? But can we put that down intentionally, right? And let the soul part, the true essence part of us take a little bit more space. That's vulnerability. I just want to share a quote. Brené Brown, because she's, she has to be mentioned in the vulnerability talk. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And I just, that's the power. But it starts by taking off some things, letting people see maybe not the part of you that you were taught that people should see. Like for me, it means doing things that I suck at, and like practicing like being bad at it. So I continue going every Thursday to my dance class, and I'm like the weakest link, but that's okay, because it's not about dance for me. It's about like enjoying and just like still being okay when I suck, So we're going to just maybe wrap up with practicing vulnerability and committing to some practical steps. And I want you guys to share, Veronica, Lincoln, what can you step into as your commitment to vulnerability?
Yeah, so I'll start. I want to practice more self-awareness, and so that I can be more in touch with my inner self, my higher self. And if I'm centered and grounded in who I am, I can be more connected and vulnerable with others in a place with wisdom and discernment. And what does that look like? And one thing that I thought about is that as I meditate in the mornings, and I'm intentional about that, take some time to write down some reflections on how I feel at the moment. How do I feel today? Because these days, with everything that's happening, it's not even how do I feel this week? It's just how do I feel right now?
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Yeah. How about you, Lincoln?
For me, I really feel strongly in looking at vulnerability from the other end of the spectrum, in terms of it being embracing power and strength. I think that a lot of times when we feel just those emotions that come up when we those emotions that come up that we most commonly associate with feeling vulnerable, is because there's unexpressed potential.
Unexpressed potential.
There is something that we have to offer from our true authentic self that can improve whatever the situation is, whatever we feel needs to be addressed from a different perspective, or at least that something needs to be done about it. So for me, that's how I look at things, and I feel empowered. I feel I feel like I can do something about the situation whenever I'm in that mindset that, okay, I don't know what's going to happen if I do this, but I'm okay with that because I know once I do it, then I'll have more information. With more information comes more ability to express power, more ability to express, more ability to represent change and influence and impact people's lives from a very helpful and loving standpoint.
Beautiful.
Good stuff. And I will commit to continuing my dance classes. I think also part of that is being vulnerable, expressing creativity and imagination.
Yes.
I know there's a lot of creative professionals out there listening. It is so vulnerable to try your best. And because it opens you up to the risk of like, it's not good enough. You know, I used to always do like 80% when it comes to music and dance, so that if it's not good enough, I'm like, it wasn't my best anyway. You know, that was my armor. And here I am, like, for no good reason, I'm trying my best at these classes and I'm really sucking. And I'm really enjoying the freedom of like not having to be good at everything.
Love it.
Yeah, that's my power. And maybe if there's like a way that like my partner doesn't listen to this, I'll try apologizing more within relationships. So I will commit to those two things.
Yes.
Thank you so much for just being so real in this episode with us, Lincoln and Veronica, for the stories, for the additions of wisdom nuggets. And I hope you listeners and viewers got something out of it, some clarity around what vulnerability is, how it can become something empowering to you and not just, you know, unsafe and painful for you. If you have comments or, you know, stories you would like to share, stories, yes, please. Yes, comment and like and heart and feel with us and journey with us, talk to us, and join us next week, 2 p.m. for a brand new episode of 30 Minutes of Wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.